Like if there is a key vendor that goes away, is that a problem? If your
Mhm.
largest customer turns off tomorrow, is that a problem? If your largest customer triples their order size tomorrow, are you happy or are you terrified? Right.
Mhm.
And so it's like those kind of things, I think, kind of help you get to the meat of the business of what they're set up to do going forward.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to Whitley Penn Talks, where we give you valuable insights to help you make confident, informed decisions and move your business forward. My name is Kendall Newcomb, and today we're here with two Whitley Penn managing directors. We have Jake Baine, Digital Services Managing Director, and Brandt Schaars, Deal Advisory Managing Director, on the line today. We're really excited to dive into this conversation and hear from both of them. So thank you both for being here today.
And thanks for having
Awesome.
me.
Of course. Looking forward to it. Today, we'll be discussing how companies can leverage data, technology, and processes to achieve their goals, whether that's financial growth, expansion, preparing for a sale or acquisition, or getting ready for any sort of major business event. This episode is also a companion to our recent What's Your Goal Insight. So if you haven't had a chance to read that, we'll link it down below as you're tuning into this episode today. But enough of what I've got to say. Now we'll have Brandt and Jake do a couple introductions before we get into our content. So, Brandt, will you kick us off and share with the listeners who you are and how you got to Whitley Penn?
Yeah, absolutely. So like you mentioned, I'm Brandt Schaars. So I started in public accounting. I was at Whitley Penn about 14 years ago, here for a little bit in the transaction advisory services group. I ended up leaving to go be CFO for a VC-backed tech startup and did that for about 10 years. We ended up selling to a private equity group and then took some time off and eventually found my way back here and wanted to get back into the M&A world and work on more deals.
Awesome. That boomerang effect
Exactly.
has a pull. Thank you very much. Jake, will you share a little bit about your background and your role here at Whitley Penn?
Absolutely. Yeah. So I started at Whitley Penn 3 years ago. My anniversary is like I think yesterday or something like that. Um, and so I was in the big four for like 10 or 11 years, did a lot of IT strategy and data analytic projects kind of all over. Didn't want to travel as much and I lived in Fort Worth. And so was able to start kind of a service line within Whitley Penn and leverage the name and connections and reputation that it has. And so we started out doing purely data analytics, and now we've kind of branched into transformation projects and process automation stuff. And obviously, AI is a big topic with technology, and so we're seeing a lot of that as well. And yeah, happy to be here and ready to kind of chat through some of the things we're seeing.
Yeah, most definitely. Well, thank you both for those brief introductions. So different perspectives, but a lot of key insight to be brought to this conversation today. So super excited to get into it. The first question that we kind of chatted through that we would include to kick us off is focusing on company growth. So a lot of companies, a lot of our clients have really ambitious growth goals, but they're still relying typically on manual processes and spreadsheets. Just over time, that's kind of how they've built things up. What do you guys see as the biggest risk of operating that way when demand increases suddenly?
Yeah, so um, I'll I'll say like a lot of times when we're helping clients make changes in their systems, that doesn't happen overnight. And so if you're a company today that has a lot of manual processes and, Excel based reporting, again, there's a sequence of activities that need to happen in order to maybe automate those things. And then we also have clients where maybe they have like an aging workforce and, 5 years from now, they want to operate potentially with the same amount or less people, but also be as productive. And again,
Okay.
those things don't just happen quickly. And so I would tell clients to think of the bigger picture, build a roadmap on what you want to fix, what you want to automate, what do you want to build, and then we can kind of help kind of sequence those activities over time, so that you're meeting kind of you're realizing that productivity and that efficiency 3 years from now, because every project will take time, and there's little things you can be doing today in order to move the ball down the field, so to say.
Yeah, definitely. And I can imagine too it gets pretty easy to get caught up in the day-to-day of operations and just making sure that things are getting done, but it's that exercise of really stepping back and saying, where do I want my business to be? What does that look like in a few years? And making sure that, just like you said, you're taking steps in that direction too, for sure. So
Mhm.
thank you for that. And what would you say? So, if a business leader was listening to this episode right now, and how can they tell if they're making those right steps in that direction?
Uh, I would say, sit down with an advisor or someone who's like sees other, technology type projects that's like
Hmm.
related to their industry and kind of just bounce some things off of them. Obviously, YouTube, really any AI tool is a really good like self validation step in order to like get your mind right on, here's where we're at. How do we get to the next step? And a lot of
Yep.
that, the knowledge that it gives you is going to be somewhat textbook. It's going to be very high level. And then our team will do a pretty good job. And there's other consultants in the marketplace where, they can kind of advise you on maybe what should go first, or, if your roadmap is sequenced correctly. And then I think a lot of times you have to just understand the pace at which middle market companies can operate or move. And so, can't do too much all at once. And understanding there's competing priorities throughout, every client that we work with. We work with $20 million client up to a billion, 4 billion, and they all kind of have the same bandwidth issues. And so, you have to kind of understand when's a good time to implement something and when's a good time to change something. And are we really ready to do this, or are we just really excited and, but we don't have like a full game plan, and making sure we follow through with, what we recommend, make sure that we get to the finish line. That's always a huge deal, but yeah, I think it's just, understanding where you're at and if you can devote time to it, and then kind of maybe building a special projects team around it internally or externally, and moving forward that way.
Yeah, definitely. And did you say YouTube was one of your first recommendations? Good thing these episodes will be on YouTube, so
Oh yeah.
Whitley Penn advice is out there.
Yes.
Um, love it, love it. Well,
Hmm.
there's definitely a lot of places that leaders and businesses can go to kind of just dip their toe into learning more and making sure that they're in the right place at the right time, or to try to figure out what steps may be required to get them there. So definitely great advice there. Brandt, kind of coming from your perspective, so you left public accounting, spent some years outside of the professional services industry in a different type of organization, and spent some time as a CFO. So what are some of the most common reasons that businesses fail to achieve the goals that they may have set for themselves from your perspective? And Jake, I'd love for you to comment on this one as well.
Yeah, yeah, I can go first, Jake. That I think one of the biggest ones I see is people setting bad goals. Honestly, it's that may just be because they don't have good systems in place to tell them what data they need. They don't know what data they should be looking at. But if you if you are not in touch with the operations of the company, it's very hard to make a reasonable goal. I mean, there's value certainly in setting very high goals, and
Hmm.
saying whatever, shoot for the stars and you'll land on the moon, or however the saying goes, right? But if it's so unreasonable, no one's going to be motivated at the company to do it. They're going to be defeated before it starts. So you kind of need to know, like, what is operationally feasible when you're setting a
Hmm.
goal, as far as how quick is your cash flow coming in, how much can you afford to spend to accomplish this goal, um, and how close is it to what you have already done in the past to really kind of define.
Yeah, so I don't disagree with anything Brant laid out there. I think, a lot of times CFOs will maybe underestimate the time constraints that they are, working within to get things done. And then I think a big one, especially coming from like the technology world, is like, reporting isn't just Excel files, and sorting and those things. There's process woven throughout your company with data flowing through them. There's multiple systems. There's, if there wasn't like an overall game plan for the architecture that your company sits on from a technology perspective, um, it can be really hard to build sustainable, like push button reporting or those types of things. And so that's where the manual gaps show themselves. And then that ultimately becomes kind of like, that's your gap analysis, if you will. When you find those manual things, like that's what the system doesn't have built in, that,
Hmm.
kind of becomes our requirements that we go and implement at a client. So, I think some clients just kind of fast track to, let's go build a report, and they don't think about like process, data, technology, the people, like the operating model, right? So I think,
Right.
you just kind of zoom into the data and you don't think the big picture. So I think sometimes that's why some of the goals they set out don't necessarily, get to the finish line that they expected.
Yeah. Absolutely. I think there's definitely a marriage here between technology and then also just kind of stepping out and thinking about the strategy of your business and making sure that you're setting yourself up technologically to achieve that strategy that you're setting forth to make sure that you have potentially better goals that are achievable and attainable on that
Mhm,
timeline, whatever
mhm.
that timeline may be for those organizations, for sure. So what are some warning signs, Brant, that a company thinks that it's ready for growth? Maybe it just feels it. It's got momentum. It's just somebody wakes up and has a lot of enthusiasm that day. So what's a warning sign that that feeling may not be um, prepared operationally or financially from your perspective?
Yeah, I think a big one, especially, say the 0 to 20 million range, revenue wise, it's, I ask the founders a lot of times, what would happen if you took a month off tomorrow? What would break first?
Yeah.
Because a lot of times, the smaller the company gets, the more decisions are flowing through key people. And
Hmm.
maybe even if it's bigger than just, a smaller company, right? There may be a lot of tribal knowledge in the head developer or the head of account executives or something like
Yep.
that, right? Where if you are not well set up to kind of operationalize everything, if it is all just in somebody's head and it is
Hmm.
just the fact that they're willing to work hard and, stay at the office after hours to keep stuff going, that's kind of a big red flag to me
Hmm.
that you need to put systems around that and you need to have contingencies in place too, right? So that
Yeah.
it's, if the founder does get hit by a bus tomorrow or something like that, right, that there's a roadmap to keep going and that people understand.
Yeah. Absolutely. If they don't get hit by a bus, we say they won the lottery, but they're out of there.
That's a better answer.
So what would happen? Yeah, yeah, definitely. No, it's really interesting to think about that and to make sure that clients and companies and those listening out there have proper documentation or are thinking about getting to a place where you have that proper documentation that may just live in an individual's head, but somebody's writing that down, somebody's passing that on. I think that's probably a really important step when you're growing fast.
Yeah, I think so. And I think there's no shame either in recognizing that it's different people for different stages of the company, right?
For
The
sure.
person who took it from 0 to 10 may not be the person that takes it from 10 to 50 or 50 to 100.
Definitely. So when you're looking at evaluating a business's readiness for that major opportunity or that project that we're stepping into, that kind of just opportunity that's in front of us, what areas of the organization do you personally assess first in that scenario? And then Jake, we'll come to you after that.
So I guess a lot of the opportunities I evaluate right now tend to deal with M&A since we're doing a lot of deal advisory work.
Hmm.
And and so a lot of times I'm kind of starting with their financial systems and just seeing, are these real? How clean are the books? How quickly are they able to give me the data I want? How quickly are they able to give me the supporting data just to get a
Hmm.
sense of how kind of real their profit is? And then after that, it's kind of a lot of the same things, right? You're trying to map out those single failure points. Like if there is a key vendor that goes away, is that a problem? If your
Hmm.
largest customer turns off tomorrow, is that a problem? If your largest customer triples their order size tomorrow, are you happy or are you terrified? Right.
Hmm.
And so it's like those kind of things, I think, kind of help you get to the meat of the business of what they're set up to do going forward, not just what they're set up to keep doing at the exact same level they have been doing.
Yeah. Absolutely. And thinking about all of those items, so in any single points of failure, understanding operational capacity. I mean, you said even if your best client triples their order tomorrow, a lot of people would say that's a really good thing, but is that going to keep you up at night in a different way? So definitely something to consider for sure and look at more closely from your perspective. Um, Most definitely. Jake, anything to add there on those last two topics before we jump back up to another question?
Yeah, so we have a client basically run their entire company off of Excel spreadsheets. So they have like an Excel file for like their CRM, they have an Excel file for their projects, they have a Excel file for their financials, and maybe even inventory, right? And they basically run every department off of Excel spreadsheets. They do really well, but the owner was like, thought of opening another store is terrifying because I know the way I do it. I know the way that this person maintains this Excel file and how it feeds into this one.
Mhm.
And since everything's kind of happening outside of a traditional ERP or system, it's like it's really hard to replicate that if those exact people aren't in that new office or area. And so we're helping kind of like bring, what they're doing today into a more modern system. And so that's something that, like from a readiness perspective, you can keep operating that way, but if you want to obtain the growth that you're looking at, like you understand that you've kind of hit a wall, and so now we have to make an investment to maybe modernize what we're doing. And so, we see that a lot. And I think in order to, are you ready or not, is like, are you ready to invest in this and understand that this is, a long term kind of view and not a 6 to 12 month, sprint kind of thing. So
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for adding that for
yeah,
sure.
yeah.
And I know we've got just a few questions here, and some of them we were prepping in advance, and so I wanted to hit one more, and then we've got some kind of open conversation for the whole group to wrap us up. But so Jake, coming back to you quickly, if a company wants to be ready for that major opportunity, we're talking about kind of an alluding to this next step in your technology journey, whether it's an event or acquisition or just rapid growth that they're planning for, what are the first operational or technology improvements that you recommend they prioritize? You kind of just talked about it from a specific client perspective and looking at those spreadsheets, moving to an ERP, but is there anything else you look at first in that scenario?
So in the technology consulting world,
Hmm.
everything is like you're operating fine today. I think most companies are doing okay. So what's like the real catalyst for them to invest in a big transformation project or a new implementation of some technology? Uh, the onus is on us as, with my team in order to put the business case together on like why you should invest this amount in order to get these capabilities or these efficiencies.
Hmm.
So a lot of times the client needs to know where they're at, from a current state perspective. And then we can then isolate directly like what we will look to improve and then maybe assign a value to that. So maybe there's like less manual processes. Therefore, you need, maybe less people doing one specific process and they can move off and do something else. Going back to what I said earlier, like maybe there's like a retirement cliff that's on the way. And like Brent was saying earlier on like tribal knowledge, like how do we take tribal knowledge and digitize it inside of our processes and our systems so that it isn't tribal knowledge anymore. It's really like systematic buttons and processes within an ERP. And so in order to get to, those improvements, you really have to know where you're at. It's not rocket science. And then we don't move into technology implementations or building anything until we understand the business, the pain points, what you currently have.
Yeah.
We don't push specific software or technology. We just intend to help solve pain points and business problems at the right pace and what makes the most sense for the client. So that's kind of how I would go about it.
Yeah, definitely. Well, we've talked a lot about growth points and looking for upcoming projects and things. And so I know a lot of people out here listening are thinking about how this conversation may apply to their role, or they may be thinking about this in different ways. And we are staying a little bit more vague on this conversation because there's so many different types of clients, so many different industries that we serve. And so if you are listening to this, just know that a conversation with Brandt and Jake would definitely be a good next step if you're curious and want to know more on how this applies to your specific scenario, because there are just a million different ways that a business could be structured and that goals can be set. And so definitely want to customize to that need for sure. So moving down into a couple questions that we have before we wrap up today, but this has been a great conversation. So what in general are some of the biggest obstacles outside of what we've already talked about today with that travel knowledge and a few other items there?
I can jump in first if you want, Jake.
Yeah, go for it.
Yeah, maybe a little bit of it's kind of a combination of all of them, really. But I think kind of at least at my company when I was CFO, it was a big combination of planning and data were our two kind of biggest hurdles we had to overcome. Uh, we started exactly like Jake mentioned. A lot of stuff was just in Excel. Eventually we had QuickBooks. So at least you have QuickBooks, but that only works for so long. And so, we're invoicing monthly out of Excel files and sending them manually and having all these disparate systems and stuff. And so when
Yep.
you are in the thick of it, it's only the next fire that matters for the most part.
Hmm.
But at some point, you have to plan to scale a little bit. And so, kind of starting to build those systems to let you get the data you need in order to plan effectively, right? It all comes after the other. Because I think
Hmm.
every company's going to have people that will work hard, or, at least they should, right? That's why they're hired. That's why they're there. So I think giving them the right tools to do it goes a long way.
I think the biggest obstacle is like there's too much politics and people and approval processes that need to happen in order for something to move across the finish line. I think, coming from like a big four world, like that's what you often see is just a lot of organizations that are kind of jockeying for position, and maybe the value doesn't always get to where it needs to be. And then when we've worked, with smaller clients like in the middle market, I think their biggest obstacle is there's a lot of noise in technology, and there's always something new, and then now we have AI, right? Where maybe there's like a sense of false expertise by just asking questions, and sometimes the AI tool is really helpful in like bouncing things off of it. But when you take into account the people part, maybe what your future goals are, maybe with the economics of your business, maybe the economics around your business, and all these things included, there's not one size fits all, and there's not like a can't chat GPT your way through a transformation. There's a lot of pieces that have to be considered in order for it to effectively like move. And
Hmm.
so I think middle market clients are kind of struggling with just all the noise and tools and technology, and they don't know which one to go with. And so I would recommend that they have a trusted advisor in the room that can just kind of slow some of it down and give some advice and be held accountable for the value that they're looking to obtain, and like they can kind of coach through those things. And so and again, when you have competing priorities and there's a million things on your plate, it's really hard to innovate and improve things while you're also trying to make sure the books are closed and you're growing and you're setting strategy moving forward. So I think having kind of a special projects team or something like that helps just kind of keep the noise at an approachable pace.
Yeah, definitely. I know a lot of we work with a ton of tech vendors and they have really hungry sales teams. So
Hmm.
as much as they're going to want to get in front of you, it feels that way too at
Yeah.
times. So it's
Yep.
it's very helpful to have someone in the room or somebody that you can call quickly that you can kind of get the down low from on what's the
Hmm.
story with this new vendor in our industry? How is this different from this other one that we've already been talking to for a while? And just having someone trusted to get some of those answers because yeah, definitely have some pretty strong sales teams at a lot of these AI startups and tech companies for sure.
Hmm.
They want to get you on the phone.
Yes.
Um, what's one What's one question that every leadership team, for this is for both of you, open discussion. What's one question that every leadership team should ask themselves to determine whether they're truly ready to scale? I know we've again kind of hit on these questions throughout, but what's a question that they can ask themselves?
Uh, Maybe take the first crack. I would say, are you ready to treat this like a special project and devote people's time to this? It's not a part-time thing. Um, it's a full-time thing, as much as it can be, and that you augment maybe with external resources.
Hmm.
I think, and then having like a direct line of communication to the executive sponsor, so that if roadblocks happen, if there's like fatigue in the project because it's taking too long or whatnot, like the tone at the top is kind of re-energizing people to like get this to the finish line. If you don't have that sponsorship at the top for an extended period of time, it'll start to kind of slow down. You'll kind of lose direction on where you're going, why you're doing it, and nobody wants that. So I think it's just making sure that, once we break the huddle, that like, we're going and we're moving, and this is the timeline, and just holding people accountable that everyone's rowing in the same direction.
Yeah, absolutely. So, do we have management buy-in? Do we have leadership buy-in? Would really be that question. And do we have the ability to create true priorities around this in a full-time fashion? Yeah, definitely. Brant, what's your take there? What would you say?
Yeah, I mean, to your point, I think we did a lot of things we mentioned previously. I think
Yeah.
fit here, um, but I think it's also important that they're able to quickly answer the question of where they are right now. Right? If it takes you 2 weeks to put together a 13-week cash flow, like that's not a very useful place to be in. Or, if it's 20 days after the end of the month where you finally close and your financials look like from the previous month, it when you're working off of stale data and kind of incomplete data and you're not confident that it's even accurate,
Hmm.
it's hard to get any level of leadership buy-in that you're ready to scale beyond that. You're just kind of running as fast as you can and thinking you're right until you find out you're not.
Hmm.
So I think just having those systems in place to give you that information quickly, and even if you need to step back for a second and spend the time to kind of patch the holes in the boat before you keep rowing forward,
Yeah.
I think that's pretty critical. Otherwise, you're just eventually it's going to hurt you one way or the other. And so it's whether it's on your terms or whether it comes up when you're not expecting it.
Hmm.
Um, it's important just to be
Yeah, definitely. I think the visual of patching the holes and also rowing, you can't, you can't row too far if you don't take a minute to fix what you know is right in front of you, or look at those blind spots that you may be ignoring too. I think there's a lot there with taking a minute and then looking forward, or just pressing on. Definitely. Yeah. And then to wrap us up today, I know we're just about at time. So you've both worked with organizations that are trying to improve performance and prepare for growth in different ways. So all of our clients are thinking with that sort of mindset. What's the defining characteristic of companies that consistently achieve their goals compared to those that maybe don't as often?
I can go first on this. I mean, my
Yep.
my thought would be it's really discipline around the small stuff, the boring
Mhm.
stuff. It's consistently closing on time. It's consistently returning calls on time. It's cutting the people that should be cut quickly. And, it's all of the little small boring decisions, just doing them consistently over and over. It has such a huge impact. With AI, everyone's hoping that they'll install it and that will be the answer. And I'm sure it will be an answer and it will help, but it won't replace just staying disciplined, staying consistent, and continuing to do the work.
Yeah, absolutely. My team knows this, but one of my favorite books is Atomic Habits, and really it just talks about that 1% improvement over time, and maybe it's not even an improvement. Maybe it's just doing what you need to do over long periods of time gets you in an exponentially better spot than trying to be twice as good here and there. So
Exactly.
definitely
Yeah. No,
love
I
that.
love that book. Entirely agree.
Yeah. My favorite for sure. Jake, what would you say is a defining characteristic of companies that continuously achieve their goals time after time?
So coming from like the technology side, um, it's 100% having like a vision and like a roadmap of what you want to accomplish, why you want to accomplish it, what capabilities in your company do you not have that you want to have, because as technology is always changing, if you don't have like a kind of a standpoint from like this is what we want to accomplish and this is why, then you'll
Hmm.
kind of always be in this like constant implementation phase within your company, and you'll constantly just be kind of, looking at the next shiny thing and not really understanding why. So,
Hmm.
and now your 5 year and your roadmap will obviously change over time. But I think if you're not rooted in like where you're trying to go, then you kind of just keep getting sold new tools and you have more tools, and it's just start overlapping capabilities within your departments. And the larger your company gets, the bigger of a problem that gets. So
Hmm.
it's important to kind of set a strategy and then just kind of, look at it every 6 months or whatever, refresh it every year and just know what you're investing in, why you're doing it, how does it connect with everything else. That way you don't get, called off sides on some new technology that, maybe wasn't as effective or useful as you thought it was. So always having that to go back to as time progresses kind of keeps you honest with where you're headed.
Yeah, definitely. Because in a lot of ways, transformation can create disruption, but it can be a good thing if you're ready for it and prepared for it, and
Hmm.
you know
Hmm.
what that puzzle piece that you're looking for needs to
Yep.
look like. So
Yep.
definitely. Awesome, awesome. Jake and Brant, thank you so much for joining us today and sharing your experience and knowledge with us. This has been a really great conversation focused on business growth and goals and the way that businesses can think about achieving the goals that they put forward for themselves from both a financial perspective and a technological perspective. So really appreciate both of you taking the time and sharing your knowledge with listeners. For those listening, if you enjoyed today's episode, be sure to subscribe on YouTube. Speaking of, we mentioned YouTube earlier today. YouTube, Spotify, Apple, or listen right on our website at whitleypenn.com/podcast. Again, you can find the companion insight linked below that we mentioned at the beginning of this episode. If you're interested in receiving more episodes straight to your inbox, check the link in the description to sign up for our email list. Thank you all again for being here and have a great rest of your day. Thanks, Brant. Thanks, Jake.
Thanks, Kendall.
Thank you.